Well, let's look at the role then of young people and the role which they can play in the revival of South Africa's economy during the COVID-19 pandemic. We're joined by the ANC's Fasiha, Hassan, and the DAMP as Sibongiseni Ngcobo, and Mr. Ngcobo will be with us a little bit later in this conversation. Fasiha, let me begin with you then. When you look at some of the challenges that are facing the country right now, what are the solutions that you as young people within the ANC are putting on the table as solutions?
Look, there's a few big issues that we're really focusing on. Of course, education's on the agenda, but I think the real big one and, the elephant in the room, so to speak, is around youth unemployment. And that's a huge focus, not just for myself, but for many other young public representatives, about ensuring that whatever policy we put through, young people are at the center. And it's not just about short-term employment. It's around how we sustainably create long-term solutions for young people. I mean, the statisticians are quite clear. Independent of education level, it's very hard to get a job. And that's something that's well with us, and it's definitely something that we are pushing very, very hard on. So any sort of policy that comes for any work of government, we're being very clear in pushing that young people are at the center of the agenda.
You've had some time now to get into the role of being a member of the provincial legislature. I wonder, given the fact that you're part of structures that are so much more entrenched and have a way of functioning beyond any particular individual, how are you finding that your voice it still matters and that it's not drowned out by everything else that is happening within this institution that you're a part of in the legislature, but also within your organization, the ANC?
Look, I think there's some benefits to being in an organization like the ANC. As you've rightfully alluded, it's not about the individual, it's about the collective. And in many ways, that allows us to bring in many different points of view to the table. But of course, and I think the bigger issue here is how do we ensure that as a young public representative, we're not there as sort of tokenists, or we're not there just to check boxes. And that's really around every single day ensuring that we are a meaningful part of the conversation. But more importantly, that when we make comment or when we make suggestions, that's actually considered when it comes time to decision making. So there are some challenges, there's no doubt. In any organization there would be, especially because there's fewer young people in the space. But that doesn't mean that we are unable to push the right agenda. And I have to be honest and say that I'm very lucky to be in the space that I'm in. I mean, even now, I'm the acting chairperson of economic development, the portfolio committee. I'm also the shadow chairperson of oversight of the premier and the legislature. So what we're seeing is that young people, particularly in the ANC, are being given opportunities, and we are being given space, at least in my experience in the legislature, to actually make a meaningful contribution. I mean, I'm 26 years old, I'm the youngest MPL, I'm an acting chairperson and the shadow chairperson of another committee. So we really are putting in a lot more effort, I think, as opposed to before, to allow meaningful youth voices into the space.
Sure. I want to draw then on this idea of the collective, because ultimately how we've seen that play out is that there may be ideas on the table. Some of them may be really great ideas, but those ideas may be superseded by different interests that are also at play, given the political nature of how things sometimes play themselves out. So what are the tangibles that you look at as a young person that you think, well, I took this into the meeting, and this is in fact what we're seeing now being translated into policy. So what are the wins, the clear wins that you can identify as having been as a result of your position in the legislature?
There's two things here. The one is the current situation, and the second is the more long-term and what I would consider success after. In terms of walking into a meeting, look, I think the first thing is that in being in this space, and I think this is something maybe people at home don't quite realize, it's a lot of work, a lot of reading, a lot of preparation. And so on the different issues, and maybe I should be more specific, we are pushing very much to provide support to young entrepreneurs in Gauteng around small-scale businesses and small-scale farmers. And we are also trying to push that they don't just get the financial support, but they also get support in terms of tangible skills. Now, those are actually arguments that have so far been won. So that's one specific example of what's going on now. But I think, Cathy, you're asking me a more longer-term thing. And for me, it's about, like I said earlier, when we make any policy decision or any actually decision, my role is to look, number one, at the effect on young people. And if it's not a positive effect, we need to create a different intervention. And number two, this is also very important, what is its effect on young black women in particular? This is not something that we can also brush away or put on the wayside, especially given what's going on with GBV and the war on women bodies right now. There's a need for us to, whatever decision we make and whatever position we take, it needs to be one that benefits the most marginalized. So that's the kind of more long-term thing. But maybe just before I hand over, if I look back, I mean, we've been in office now for 1 year. It's a 5-year term. If at the end of 5 years we can have included more young people into the space, more young people at the table, and have policies and bills that benefit young people, that will probably be quite a victory in the space.
Politics on its own is quite fragmented. You'll find clusters of people that group together, even though they are under one umbrella. I wonder, when it comes then to consolidating a position, consolidating a view, what do you use as the main tool to do that? What informs some of the decisions that you are taking and some of the positions you're taking on issues in this country right now?
Like you've said, you know, politics is politics, but the benefit of having entered in very recently and still being very close to my constituency, which are students and young people in particular, one of the tools I use really, and it's even been today, is trying to include more young people into the conversation through social media. And I'll be specific. We'll have a policy document in front of us. I'll share some of that information and get feedback from other young people. So this is not something that's just being informed in an echo chamber on the side. This is something where I think as young people we're trying to reinvent the game of how people interact with their politicians and their public reps. I mean, even we have a climate change bill that's going to be coming up, and we're looking at, or I'm looking at, something more social media orientated, for example, on how we engage with it. So it's not just going to be a bunch of people in a room thinking they know the answer. We're going to be able to engage a lot more young people on what their views are, and that will inform the position moving forward.
Sure. I'm going to let into this conversation DAMP as Sibongiseni Ngcobo. He, of course, is also the youngest member in the National Assembly. Sibongiseni, good evening. It's a pleasure to have you on News at Prime.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me.
Sure. I wonder, as a young person who's, again, part of an institution that is so big, who's having to deal with people that are significantly older than them, in more cases than not, what is it like being able to ensure that you still are able to assert your views, be clear on some of the positions that you take on issues affecting young people?
I think that, first of all, it's a great privilege to have been able to become a member of parliament and elected to serve the people of South Africa. And I think that it is also a very great platform for a young person like myself to speak on behalf of the young people who feel that their voice is not being heard. I mean, I don't think it's an acceptable situation that 44 years later, since the uprising, the 1976 uprising, we still have more than 50% of young people who are unemployed. So being a member of parliament at this age enables me, gives me that ability to be able to speak on behalf of those young people. And I also happen to serve on the Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities Portfolio Committee, where we interact with institutions like the NYDA, which are supposed to fund and help young people, especially young people who have business ideas and who want funding to get those ideas off the ground. So I serve in this structure, and we make sure that we get the NYDA working and helping young people, even young people who are in the remote areas, in rural areas like in Mzimkhulu, KZN. There's a guy called Umzamo. He has a business idea. He's applied numerous times to government institutions for funding, but he has failed and he never received any funding. So it's our responsibility to speak on behalf of those people and making sure that they get assistance.
I wonder, as a young black person, if there are any challenges when it comes to articulating policy that you know is necessary for the majority of South Africans versus perhaps what may be a position that is taken by your party in particular in Parliament when it comes to some of the views that it may have on issues like affirmative action, etc.?
I think that where we come from as a Democratic Alliance, I think that we have great mechanisms in place to ensure that we process policies and make sure that those policies are based on evidence and that they are able to take young people forward. For instance, at the moment we are running a campaign that we call the Youth Hustle Campaign, and the Democratic Alliance, the youth leader, Louis Olympic, has been vocal about this campaign, where we are saying that the informal or young people who are in the informal sector, the informal traders, they must get assistance because right now it seems as if they are being forgotten. The NYDA recently had a program where they help or give relief to businesses that are registered, businesses that are owned by young people and that are suffering under the lockdown regulations. But there are so many applications that were turned down from the informal traders. So we are saying that the government must start recognizing this sector, because when you want to get young people working again, then we must start recognizing this sector and harness the potential that it has. Secondly, we also say that there must be access to data. Young people must be able to access the internet. In areas like in rural areas, in KZN, like Sibongiseni and Ngcobo and Pulo, you must build job centers where young people can go to those places, access the internet, get assistance on drafting their business proposals and business plans, so that we are able to get as many young people as possible to be successful entrepreneurs and in turn create jobs for other young people.
ANC MPL Fasiha Hassan and the DA MP Sibongiseni Ngcobo. Let's leave it there for tonight. Thanks for your time on News at Prime.